Welcome to this episode of Real World in Government Contracts. My name is Stephanie Wilson. I am a partner and a director of government contracts here at Barron Zweig Leonard. And with me today, I have a guest, Jeff Shen from Red Team Consulting.
Hi, Stephanie. It's great to be here.
Great. We're excited to have you. So our topic today is an important one for federal contractors, especially small businesses, which is preparing and planning for business growth. So I think the federal contracting space is unique where small businesses really can experience very rapid growth and, sometimes even double or triple their size overnight if they're awarded, a very large contract. And while that can be a very exciting opportunity, it's certainly not without its headaches or its challenges. And so today we've brought you here. You're going to put you on the hot seat. I'm going to ask you some questions about, some of these scenarios and also have you provide some tips and strategies for preparing for business growth. So before we jump in, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and also tell us a bit about Red Team?
Sure. So I've been with Red Team now for over 15 years. I'm the president of the company, and the company's been in business for 17 years. My background has been all in consulting for, it hurts me to say this, over 25 years, all in consulting. But I've had the benefit of working for small, mid-sized, and large companies and have over 20 years in the federal GovCon space, majority of which has been in business development. So that's my background.
Great. And that's a great background for this topic today. So I think what we'll end up doing is kind of talking through almost like the cycle starting from the beginning stages of a company that's either a startup company or just new to federal contracting and talk through some of the growing pains they may experience as they go through and hopefully eventually launch into sort of that full and open competition space. So starting with the startups and companies that are new to government contracting, is this a good time to get into that market right now?
I'd like to say there's always a good time to get into government contracting, despite what people might read in the news and the difficulties and the barriers that exist. And even before I answer that question, I want to give some context in the sense that, over the 15 years that I've been with Red Team, we've worked with thousands of companies, every type of company from a startup to the largest integrator. But I would speak for the startup companies and companies looking to get into GovCon, yes, now is a good time, as good as any, just because of the resources that are available to support small businesses as they enter the federal market. So I think it's a great time.
And so what are some of those resources that you mentioned? I know, a lot of people probably have heard of the SBA, Small Business Administration. What can they provide, and what are some other resources that are out there as well?
So for those companies that are just starting off, I would advise looking at some of the publicly available resources that agencies like the SBA provide. So SBA, General Services Administration, GSA, if you're planning to target within DoD, Department of Defense, there's a lot of online resources, procurement guidelines that companies and individuals should read as they're starting off. And then beyond that, as they're starting to plan their growth, there are other publicly available resources like Beta.SAM. I will reserve my opinion on what people think about Beta.SAM, but it is an opportunity database that as you're starting to build pipelines that you need to look into. And then I'll just call it the publications that are available, articles that people should read specific to their industry in GovCon that are free and people should read up to get familiar with how GovCon works.
So what kinds of contracting opportunities are out there for newer and smaller companies? Are they really limited to being subcontractors? Do they have the opportunity to go after any prime contracts? What's out there for companies looking to get into this space?
We could spend 2 hours just talking about these resources. Okay. For any small business getting started, there are basic opportunities you could look up. There are things called SBIRs, SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Opportunities. Part of getting into GovCon is getting smart on the procurement guidelines, and just know that if you are able to get in front of the government customer and they want to work with you, they can do easy things like a credit card purchase if you have a product or a smaller service that you're offering. There are things called the simplified acquisition threshold where they can hold like mini competitions. And I don't want to get too overcomplicated for some of the companies that are getting involved in GovCon, but those are some of the avenues if you're looking to prime work. But one of the easiest paths is to still look for teaming opportunities. There are so many mid-size and large companies that are required by law to bring on small business companies to their team on any large contract. And so part of the BD effort should be marketing to these large companies and getting in front of them to find opportunities.
So what about some of the set-aside programs? So the 8A program is one that I know a lot of companies hear about. The Service Disabled Federal-Owned Small Business, Woman-Owned Small Business, HubZone. How important is it to a small business or a new company to try to set themselves up in a way that they can take advantage of those programs? Like if they don't qualify, is that going to be a real hurdle for them in getting started?
If a small business qualifies for one of the socioeconomic programs, 8A, Service Disabled Veteran, HubZone, Woman-Owned, those are the main ones. You should absolutely go through the process of qualifying. Some are more difficult than others. So if you are a racial minority and trying to go after the 8A program, the hurdles are a little bit higher versus trying to just go for a woman-owned small business path. But just know that the contract opportunities that exist for those socioeconomic designations are greater. And the reason why I also know this is because a lot of our small business clients will sometimes come to us and just say, we're a vanilla small business. It's okay. You could still go after opportunities as a regular small business. But if you had one of the socioeconomic designations, there are greater opportunities for you.
Right. And so where should companies, you mentioned, a couple of resources, but where should companies look to for those contract opportunities?
And so the two main paths that I would see is through the teaming partner route. So see what they're going after, see if you can develop a relationship with them. And then BetaSAM is that other one where they could look up. It is the publicly available database of opportunities that the government uses. If you wanted to look at historical spend or contracts, you can also go to usaspending.gov or fpds.gov, Federal Procurement Data System. That also has all the historical contracts. Now, for those companies that do have some initial funding, I would recommend one of the available paid tools that are out there, something like a Deltek GovWin. Mm-hmm. And I understand there's a higher cost to it, but in terms of trying to save time and not beat your head over trying to figure out BetaSAM, a tool like Deltek GovWin could help tremendously.
Okay. So as a company starts to, get some work either as a subcontractor or awarded some of their own contracts, and they're, starting to grow their business, their annual revenues are going up, they're adding some more staff. A lot of companies, they start with maybe 2 or 3 employees, and even a jump to 10 or 12 employees can be a shift in that company culture and where they're going. What would you say are sort of the different key stages of growth for small businesses where things really start to shift at different points?
That's a great question. We often see a fairly large shift every few $1 million of revenue. So I look at companies that are 1 to 5 million, very different than a company that's 5 to 10, very different than a 10 to 20 million dollar company. And a lot of that has to do is when you are a 1 to 5 million dollar company, as the owner, you're kind of doing everything.
Right.
Right? You're either a billable resource working on site and doing BD at night, or you're the owner and doing BD and you're trying to hire people doing the billable work, but it's late nights, weekends, working around the clock. When you start shifting that company to be a $5 to $10 million company plus, then you need to start thinking about, well, who do I need to hire to take over some of the, I don't want to just say operational roles, but it's the roles where either you're not strong in or roles that you just need to shift off of your plate to somebody else. And you also need to start thinking about, I call it investing in your infrastructure, mm-hmm. which is everything from the internal tools that you use to getting accounting systems in place, getting the right certifications like CMMI and ISO. As companies move beyond, that's what they need to start looking at.
And so do you see that more as driven by, say, the size of the company based on revenues or based on number of employees, number of contracts that they might be awarded? What do you think are the real, tipping points? Is it really that dollar threshold, do you think is sort of the biggest consideration?
Oh gosh, that is such a good question, Stephanie. So the answer is there's not really one exact formula, and I'll explain what I mean by that. We work with some companies that are $20 to $25 million a year. So they're a fairly good sized small business, but there's like 2 overhead positions. There's like the president, right? And then there's a COO, and then maybe everything else is outsourced and they don't have CMMI and ISO. But the downside is maybe 80% of the business is as a subcontractor. So it's really dependent upon the ownership or the leadership of the company in the direction they want to take the company. Because I would argue that $20 to $25 million a year company with no overhead, mostly subcontracting work, they're going to hit a ceiling where they simply can't grow any further because they didn't invest in the overhead and infrastructure that is needed to win certain IDIQs and GWACs, expand their presence in certain agencies. So I don't know if it's a good answer or not, but that's the answer I'm going to give you because it's not the same for every company.
Yeah, and I think what you just mentioned is a good point, and we'll probably touch on it in a little bit more detail later on, but if you're really hovering at that 2025 range, you could very accidentally trip yourself into no longer being small, and if you don't have that infrastructure in place, and you really have just 2 people running the company, you're going to face a whole bunch of new hurdles once you're in that space. So I think, that's kind of what we'll be discussing today in a little more detail is what are some of those strategies and solutions you can put in place in advance so that way that doesn't happen. So are there any common traits or characteristics you've seen for companies that have made that jump successfully?
For those companies that have made the jump successfully, and I say that every small business has a different size standard depending upon the service or products that they provide to the government. A lot of the ones that have made the leap successfully have planned for it. And we often advise companies of this as well, which is as they're nearing their size threshold, they're leaping over, not just kind of tiptoeing over the size standard. And so some of that is looking at opportunities that are unrestricted, that are full and open, in building a pipeline that is filled with these full and open opportunities, because the downside of continually competing on small business set-aside contracts as you're nearing the size standard is that when you make the leap and you're now big, those small business contracts, when they recertify, you could be deemed as ineligible to continue the contract. And so definitely planning ahead and looking at those unrestricted opportunities is key.
Yeah. And so, you mentioned at different points, bringing on more of that sort of support and operations staff. What would you say are some of the key roles that companies should consider starting to bring in-house rather than outsourcing? And at what stages do you think it's most important to bring that in?
What I would advise companies is that as they hire, they need to bring in other leaders. I see a lot of companies as they grow bring in people that, this is going to sound terrible, but they're like yes people, and they will do whatever the CEO, the ownership says. But you actually need to bring on people that will push back and challenge you. It's the old adage of hire people that are smarter than you. And those small businesses that don't manage to succeed, one of the roadblocks they have is they just hire people that will listen to them as opposed to challenging them. And so in terms of the roles themselves, it's really trying to fill in the gaps of what you as a leader don't necessarily do well or you need to hand off. So if you are that technical leader, you have to bring in strong BD leadership. But if you are that growth-minded person already, then you need to hire the best operational or CTO level people that can grow that part of the company.
And so how would you say the corporate planning differs at different stages of growth?
So corporate planning is something that we recommend every company do from the day that you start as an entrepreneur, where you need to have the business plan. You need to have a plan of attack, in understanding that your plan of attack might change, especially as you're starting off. But then every year you continue to revisit that plan and update that plan. If not every quarter, you're updating that plan. And as you grow as a company, the key thing that I recommend is making sure that you invite not just your senior-most leaders to a corporate strategic planning session, but it's even your line level or mid-level folks, so they have a say. And there's a specific reason for that, which is as you scale your company 5 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, your staff needs to feel empowered. And the easiest way to have them feel empowered is to have them participate in that planning session. What do we want to be when we grow up? Because they will walk away with that feeling of I have a personal stake and I'm going to do everything I can to help my company achieve their goals.
So are you, would you say something like a 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, like different outlooks? And again, like you said, recognizing those can easily change, but to put some sort of framework around it, put different benchmarks about where you think you might be. I mean, would that help from a strategy standpoint if you're expecting, okay, you know, we're going to continue to grow on this trajectory. We think we'll be here in 5 years. What do we need to do to get to that point? And, you know, is there a benefit to a company sort of setting a goal time for when they think they will reach that full and open status? Or is it something that's better to take sort of year by year?
I advise companies when they do their planning to do a minimum of a 1 year, but then have a 3-year outlook.
3 year, okay.
I used to suggest 5 years, and then I realized, and you know this too, Stephanie,
Yeah.
in GovCon, it's like night and day every 5 years, and so it's hard to look that far ahead. Sometimes it might help if certain contracts are coming up for a recompete in 5 years. You want to include them in the planning. So a 1 and 3 year, and when we talk about strategic planning, it's talking about the financial and the non-financial goals. So what revenue, what is our net margin, what do we want to bring in as a company, and then where do we want to go in terms of agencies, what capabilities do we want to offer? And so it's 1 year and 3 years from both perspectives. And the reason why that's important is because if you have, in fact, this is a real life situation, if you have a $10 million a year client, and they said, we want to be $500 million. This is not a joke. This is actually happening. We want to be $500 million in 4 years. And you start talking about the amount of investment required to hire all the overhead, look at acquisitions you're going to make. You start pointing the fingers and saying, well, who's going to do all this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's like 5 people in this room. How are you going to do it? You start to have a little bit more realism in terms of, okay, maybe 500 million is too high. Maybe it should be 50. Maybe it should be 25 million. Mm-hmm. And so that's why that financial planning is so important.
So sometimes companies, I've had clients or other companies that I've talked with, they actually want to stay small for strategic reasons.
Yeah.
You know, based on their customer or the type of work they do, there's actually a benefit to staying small. Do you have any suggestions for how to plan for that? Because, you know, most of the time, like we've been talking about, it's planning for that continued growth. But there are situations where companies, for very valid reasons, don't want to grow, but you also don't want to stay so stagnant that you become irrelevant in your industry.
So to put my answer in perspective, we work on about over 1,000 proposals and captures a year, and we support over 200 companies. Most of them are mid-sized companies these days that we support. And out of that full context, that question that you just asked comes up once or twice max, where a company says, gosh, we don't know if we want to go after that opportunity because that will render us, you know, no longer small. And we often have to judge it case by case to say, well, are you sure you don't want to win this? I mean, because it will almost double the size of your company for whatever reason. So my takeaway on that question is that I think it's okay to think about it that way. But my only suggestion for wanting to stay small are 2 reasons. Number one, there is an incumbent contract or a contract you want to go after that is very strategic to you for whatever reason, that is going to remain or be small business set aside. And so you should remain small if you want to win that contract. And the other related reason is if there's a particular IDIQ or GWAC that is about to be released that you feel you have a better chance to win as a small, even if there was an unrestricted track. I mean, those are really the 2 main reasons. Otherwise, I would be looking at the client and saying, you need to go after this work, you need to grow in size. But, you know, every owner is a little bit different.
Yeah. What are some common obstacles that you see in companies that have, you know, had a lot of challenges with growth? Or, you know, there are certainly companies who they seem to be ramping up, about to make that jump, and then for whatever reason, they just can't do it. And what are some of the common themes or obstacles you see in that situation?
I have a laundry list. So, I mean, I don't know how much time we have, but so, again, I'm going to caveat my answer with, you know, we have a lot of mid-sized clients, but these clients used to be small. right? These are companies that were probably 5 or 10 million, and now they're 50 to 150 million a year. But also with that, we also have a number of companies that we have supported in the past that were 15 to 20 million and stayed there, or maybe they got to 25, but then they shrunk to 10. There are very common traits that we've seen in these companies that don't make it past that mark of trying to graduating. It's a lot of it is ownership, and I'm not trying to point the fingers, but it's CEOs and owners who don't know how to let go, and they micromanage. They're involved in every single pursuit. They're in everyone's face about this is what you need to do, and they lose people because the owner never learned to let go, number one, but then learned how to empower the staff to take over some of that responsibility and growth. Essentially, fail to make the company and the people a force multiplier, and they end up being the epicenter and therefore bottleneck of the company. Similar to that is they make poor hiring decisions. I talked about, maybe they're hiring yes people instead of people that challenge them. They don't invest in their infrastructure. And so that might mean, they're a software development company, but never bothered to get CMMI level 2, 3, or 4. And those are some of the basic things that we see. Those are probably the most important ones that I've seen. It comes back down to leadership and making sure that you're doing everything to encourage and bolster your team, and actually for you as the leader to step back, which is one of the hardest things to do.
Right. And I imagine that's especially hard for business owners in this situation where, again, in the beginning and probably for several years, it was probably them and a couple of people, right? So they were not only leading the company, but like you said, they were head of HR, they were head of accounting, like they literally did everything. And so I can see that as being something that is a difficult transition for a lot of business owners when they needed to have that control for such a long period of time to be able to, like you said, let go and delegate those responsibilities to the right people.
Exactly. And I would say, you show me a company that has been stuck, at 20 or 25 million a year for 5 years, 10 years, and I will say, let's look at that leadership team, and I bet it hasn't changed, or I bet they're not there anymore. So as companies go through their growth, one of the hardest things for the ownership to acknowledge is that the people that helped you get to a certain point might not be, and in often cases, are not the people that will be there as you graduate from small business. You continually have to keep looking for the right people to help you grow that company.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. Are there any other, I think this has been a great discussion. Are there any other key tips or strategies or thoughts that you want to make sure that small businesses are aware of as they're planning for their small business growth?
I would give this tip to, again, any small business owner, but I would say the same for any mid-size owner as well, again, because we work with so many companies that are 50 to 150 million. Those, the few that are not yet acquired, let's just put it that way. There's a lot of M&A going on, so it's almost like you can count on one hand how many mid-sized companies are left. But the advice would be is to know what you are good at and to focus your energy there versus trying to learn every single aspect of the company. And so if you're not good at financials as a CEO, then you should hire a CFO. I know it sounds so basic and simple, but it's things like that where you're learning to let go of certain tasks where you're not strong. But also, and this goes for any entrepreneur and any business owner, is that the moment you are not dreaming, sleeping, eating, drinking, your company, everything, going to bed thinking, what else should I have done? I forgot to do this. I have to wake up early and do it. The moment you lose a little bit of that energy, motivation, and there's that common term, grit, then you need to think about what is the next step for the company and myself. Because some owners stay on too long, and there have been many success stories where the owners learned to take a step back and then hired others to run the company. And so it's understanding you as an individual. Am I the right person to continue leading the company? Because maybe after a certain point, you're not.
Yeah. And that obviously is a whole other topic. I think that would be a great discussion. But like you're saying, M&A is really hot right now. And one of the things that companies really do need to consider also is, are they planning to grow that company, or, are they going to acquire other companies or, be sold or whatever? But again, yeah, that's for another day, that discussion. But I want to thank you for taking the time to come today. I think this was a great topic of conversation. And thank you again for everybody for watching this episode of Real World in Government Contracts.